Accessibility for people who are deaf has come a long way over the years. More than 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. And without a sense of community, the experience can be very isolating. Sarah Jones is here now. And Sarah, you spoke with a unique family, to say the least, here in the QC.
Yeah, David, as you mentioned, the majority of deaf children are born to hearing parents. And Monica and Dirk were both born to hearing parents, but they also have two children who are deaf. So they have the unique experience of their children being able to communicate with them and also to be able to ask them questions about what it's like to be deaf, and they know that their parents understand. And it's important to also clear up any misconceptions. Being deaf is exactly like someone who can hear, they just can't hear. And Monica and Dirk say there's absolutely nothing wrong with being deaf. And there are some experiences that people that are deaf have. Like Monica told me that every time she goes to the airport, she doesn't know why, they rush up to her with a wheelchair. And she's standing there and she walked in fine, so she doesn't need a wheelchair.
Doesn't need one.
Yeah. And she finds it very comical, you know. And Dirk said that when he goes to a fast food restaurant, he asks for a piece of paper to write down what they want to order, and they always bring him a Braille menu. And both of them have a great sense of humor about it, but these are kind of stereotypes that they run into. And Monica said it's a lot of the reason why she looks at being deaf as being almost an ethnic minority, because there is a shared experience, a shared language, and a shared culture. If you have no idea what Monica just said, that's just a glimpse of what it was like for her growing up.
My parents didn't have a language they shared with me, and they were able to speak and hear the same as my brother, and so I got left out a lot more than my brother did, and I didn't have that communication with my parents and that bond with my parents, and my parents didn't understand what it was like to be deaf.
More than 90% of deaf children are born with hearing parents. Like many couples, Monica and her husband Dirk both had very different childhoods and experiences, but both say growing up as the only deaf child in their families was very isolating and frustrating.
There were several occasions when I would be very curious about what my family was doing, and I would ask my mom, "What are you guys talking about? What are you laughing about? What is that thing over there?" And she would tell me, "Well, I'll tell you later," or "It's not important," or "Wait until I'm done and then I'll fill you in." And then she never would, or when I would remind her, she would forget because it wasn't in the moment. And that was something that happened so many times growing up.
Studies say that babies can learn simple signs as young as 5.5 months old, but they may not have the hand control to sign back until they're about 8 months old. Equivalent spoken language milestones usually occur 2 to 3 months later. But after the child is around 3 years old, the advantages equalize.
There's a lot of professionals who think that if a deaf baby learns sign language, it will inhibit their ability to learn to speak and lip read. The parents are looking to the professionals to give them advice on what's going to help their child succeed. And there's a misconception among people that if you teach sign language, that will become sort of a barrier to learning English and learning to speak or read lips or read and write. But actually, what really is the case is that having that language foundation of that first language of American Sign Language helps them learn English.
Monica and Dirk had very different experiences at the school for the deaf that they each attended.
Everybody there was deaf, but we were forbidden to use sign language. We were forced to only use what residual hearing we had and learn to speak for ourselves and learn to lip read. And then when I was 16, I went to a different school and I learned sign language there. And that changed my entire worldview. It just opened everything up for me.
Dirk says because of the misinformation tied to learning sign language, his experience is a common one.
They have a lot of trauma from growing up being denied access to language.
But that's something both of their children do not have to worry about. When Monica gave birth to Camilla and Sammy, doctors said they were sorry that the babies were deaf. Monica says she was confused by that.
I feel like her experience is better because my parents didn't have a language they shared with me, and Camilla has that because her dad and I are both deaf, and so we understand what the experience is like to grow up as a deaf person and to be a deaf person in a world where almost everybody else can hear and speak. That's something that I'm really glad that I can give my children, that access that I didn't have, that they can just ask a question in the moment and never be told that they have to wait and find out later.
And it's because of their unique family environment.
I always look forward to coming home because I could finally express myself and talk about my day without any struggle.
That they are working to help empower other deaf people in the Quad Cities with a sense of community.
And that's why one of the reasons why we set up the Deaf Club, because we are lucky enough to both be deaf and have that experience when we come home and just sort of let our hair down and communicate freely, but not a lot of deaf people do, so we wanted to create that social space for deaf people that don't have that at home to come and do that with other deaf folks.
Dirk and Monica say they're inspired by what they can provide for their children to help break down barriers for other deaf children. And Camilla, who you saw there, she's about 9 years old. Up until she was about 7, she attended school in the Quad Cities, and she said she thought she was the only deaf child in the Quad Cities, but there are over 200 just on the Iowa side. We couldn't find the data on the Illinois side, but that just gives you an idea. But the only deaf school in the entire state of Iowa is in Council Bluff, which is over 4 hours away. So the family is advocating to have a school for the deaf closer here, and that's just one of the many things they're advocating for, and we'll have that tomorrow at 10.
Well, the story of being isolated like that is so touching, and I'm glad that this is getting out there for them, and I know they appreciate it. All right, so we'll look forward to part 2. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Coming up here tonight.